Hello and welcome to a special edition of The Agenda as we examine Donald Trump's visit to China. The three-day visit was the first by a US president since 2017 and took place against the backdrop of global economic and political tension. But after several meetings between Trump and China's President Xi Jinping, the two leaders agreed what Xi termed a new vision of building a constructive China-US relationship of strategic stability. So what does this visit really mean for China-US relations and indeed for the rest of the world? Joining us now is the former US Ambassador to China, Max Baucus. Ambassador, great to have you on the show.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So, Ambassador, would like to start with the two leaders' agreement on a new vision of building a constructive relationship of strategic stability. So, what does it mean exactly to China and more specifically to the United States?
I think both countries very much want to stabilize the relationship. Both presidents want to look good back home. I think people in the United States, people in China, both would like a stable relationship. It's also very good that the two of them met, two of them talked, they shook hands. There's lots of cordial conversation, lots of flattering words both ways. So all that's good. Personal relationships are always better than relationships on Zoom or over the telephone or something. So that's all very, very positive. On the other hand, I don't know that there's anything really substantial or substantive that came out of this summit. There was some talk about by President Trump that China's going to agree to buy a lot more soybeans. China's going to agree to purchase oil. China's going to maybe buy some Boeing airplanes, maybe even invest in the United States. But you don't see a lot of confirmation of all that from the Chinese side. That's fine, in the sense that China's going to be thinking about what President Trump said, about what was agreed to and or not agreed to during the sessions. But by and large, I think it's positive. It's good that they're meeting. There is some talk about some sales. That's good.
Ambassador, at the banquet on Thursday, President Xi said achieving the rejuvenation of Chinese nation and making America great again can go hand in hand. So how might that happen?
Well, if the two of them work together, it's going to happen. That is, if the two countries work together, then China is going to do well. China's people are going to do well. Same in the U.S. And U.S. the country, U.S. companies, U.S. people do well. It really comes down to good faith, and it comes down to trust. The real question is, how much does Xi Jinping trust President Trump? President Trump, by the way, is someone who we know changes his mind a lot of time. The next question is, how much does President Trump trust President Xi? I think President Xi is known to be a little more stable, less likely to change his mind. President Trump has changed his mind a lot over the time. So it really comes down to trust, and that's going to depend upon deeds, not words, deeds. Now, they both can say wonderful things, and they both did say wonderful things about each other, about each other's country, but it really comes down to what actions does each country take or not take. You know, that depends upon the good faith of the presidents.
Yeah, exactly. It's all about what they do at the end of the day. So was this trip really about breakthroughs or simply preventing further deterioration of their relations?
I think it's more the latter. I don't see any great breakthroughs. One slight concern I have is that that the presidents at summits, shake hands. They make a lot of positive statements, and they mean well. They're basically sincere statements. But when they go back home, they face political reality. For example, President Trump's now the Air Force One is flying back to the United States. When he arrives back in Washington, he's going to be facing the realities of his presidency. That's getting this war in Iran behind him as much as possible. He's got to deal with the different constituencies in America. One are the China hawks. There are a lot of members of Congress who criticize China quite significantly, and Trump has to deal with that. But so when they both go back home, the political realities of each country starts to settle in a little bit, and each president has to push back against some of the negative realities in the sense that they've got to really work hard, spend some capital. Each has to spend some capital in order to get more agreement and more trust and cooperation both ways.
Well, Ambassador, you served in Beijing between 2014 and 2017 during a period when engagement and economic cooperation were still considered the dominant themes in China-US relations. So when we're looking at the relationship right now, today, what do you think has fundamentally changed?
It's true. There was a different mood back during 2014 and 17 and through there. And the real difference was back then, there was a lot of engagement between our two countries. Cabinet secretaries came over, many cabinet secretaries came over during that period. We had something called the SNED. SNEDs were negotiations between the two countries on fairly technical matters. They took a lot of time. There's a lot of talk. Some people wonder whether they amounted to much, but we talked. That was very good. There are also many cultural exchanges back and forth. The Philadelphia Orchestra, for example, came over. Choirs came over. There's a lot of interchange back and forth between each country, and it helped. I'm not saying it solved a lot of problems, but it helped. The slight problem back then, though, was that Americans felt, and the assumption in America was that, well, gee, all this engagement is going to make China more like us. China's going to be more like America. China's going to be maybe a little more democratic. That was a false assumption. It's an incorrect assumption, because China is not going to be more like the United States. The United States is not going to be more like China. Each is a different country. Each has very, very strong different cultural imperatives. And it's not really that relevant whether China is more like us or we're more like China. We have to recognize each as it is and work together, even though each country's culture is a bit different. Back in again, there was a lot more exchange. Today, a lot less. A lot less now because of COVID, a lot less now because President Trump pulled up the drawbridge. President Trump canceled lots of negotiations between the United States and China. President Trump wanted America to be number one, and in doing so, he really, unfortunately, cut off a lot of exchanges between our two countries.
Well, Ambassador, I also want to talk about Taiwan with you. You know, this issue is high on the agenda, and President Xi said the Taiwan question is the most important issue in China-US relations. And she said that if Taiwan issue is not handled properly, it could lead to conflict. And it's also reported, very interestingly, the White House readout didn't mention Taiwan, but President Trump also said on his way back to America, he said, I don't think there is a conflict over Taiwan, and I don't make any commitment. I may or may not sell weapons to Taiwan. So what's your take on that?
I was very impressed with the first session where President Xi referred to Taiwan very significantly, very definitely. To me, that was kind of a warning shot to the United States. That is, United States, better listen to us. Make sure that you don't upset the so-called current relationship between the United States and China over Taiwan. And frankly, I think that because President Xi spoke so strongly about Taiwan, and even though President Trump did not really mention it during the conversations in Beijing or on Air Force One or back as he lands back in D.C., it's on his mind. He knows very much what President Trump said, what President Xi said. So President Trump may, I think it's somewhat likely, back off on negotiating and confirming military sales to Taiwan. President Xi would like the United States to back off on those sales. President Xi would also like the United States to make a little bit different statement on Taiwan independence. That is, make it pretty clear that Taiwan is not an independent country. That would help. That'd upset the hawks of the United States, but it'd help about Taiwan. And if Trump doesn't really honor that in some way, then I think it's going to cause some damage in the relationship.
Well, Ambassador, let's look at one of the existing conflicts happening right now. So the US-Israel conflict with Iran, and the Chinese Foreign Ministry said that this should have never happened and added that the shipping routes should be reopened as soon as possible. Do you see this as an area where China and the United States can cooperate genuinely?
Well, I hope so. And frankly, I recommended to the Chinese government 2 or 3 weeks ago that this is an opportunity for China. This is an opportunity for China to show leadership, opportunity for China to be a kind of broker, try to help reduce the tension over Iran, an opportunity for China, frankly, to try to help President Trump save a little face so he can get out of the Iranian debacle as much as possible. I hope that, and I know that President, I don't know this, but I suspect that President Xi is trying to figure out a way, how can President Xi, help the United States with respect to Iran? President Trump very much wants to get off Iran. That is so, he wants to get that albatross off his back as soon as possible.
Well, for countries trying not to pick sides, particularly in Europe and the global south, what signal does this visit send about the future global order?
Frankly, I'm a little concerned. We are becoming more bifurcated in the world. Different countries, Europe's becoming a little bit more, try to find a way to be more self-sufficient. That's probably a reaction to the United States, which is trying to find a way for itself to be more self-sufficient, just as China's trying to be more self-sufficient. Each country is trying to de-risk its reliance upon other countries. So I do think that there aren't any, because there aren't any international organizations to regulate all this, that there's going to be some efforts on all the major countries to try to be much more self-sufficient. Now that doesn't mean there's going to be war. That doesn't mean there's going to be a greater tension. But it does mean it's going to be difficult for countries to manage the future, because the future is going to be much different than it has been, say, in the last 10 years.
So everything seemed extremely amiable and cordial, as I said just now, positive and productive, as President Trump put it. So where do you see China-US relations moving on from here?
I hope that there's more cooperation in some areas where both countries need to find some common agreement. One is AI. The United States is really concerned about AI, about new developments like Mythos, for example, developed by Anthropic, which is able to penetrate the cybersecurity defenses of virtually any entity, whether it's public or private. China is worried about the same thing, because China doesn't want its cybersecurity to be invaded by AI. So there's an opportunity for both countries to start to set guardrails to figure out how they're going to deal with AI. In fact, Secretary Besant said that they're doing that. They're trying to find ways to find guardrails, but that's going to be hard, very hard, because each country suspects the other is going to try to use AI for itself at the expense of the other. Another area, frankly, for potential cooperation is cancer. It is a real opportunity for both countries to start to work together to figure out some ways to get rid of, or at least diminish, that scourge, cancer, in various ways. And I think that it's the more we do that, by we I mean both countries, that's going to help. Beyond that, I think that it's just we have to keep working on getting the tariffs down as much as possible, figure out ways to cooperate more on rare earth. But it really comes down to trust and working with the other country. And the big problem, frankly, is insufficient trust. That's basically because each country is so big, because each country is so different from the other, because Americans don't travel to China as much as they should to learn about China. And it's basically because of therefore national security concerns. Each country should be worried about its own national security first, but because security concerns are so great, they tend to get in the way of commercial agreements between the two countries.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for your insight. Thank you.
You're very welcome, and thank you very much.
Let's continue our discussion of Donald Trump's historic visit to China. With me now are Dr. Yun Sun, Senior Fellow and Director of the China Program at the Stimson Center, Lanxin Xiang, Zijiang Chair Professor at East China Normal University, and Denis Simon, Senior Research Fellow at the Quincy Institute's East Asia Program. Great to have all of you on the show. So, Dr. Sun, I would like to start with you. How do you see this visit this time?
I think from both countries' perspective, this visit has been relatively successful. I think China has been aiming for a new definition of the bilateral relations, or new beginning of the bilateral relations. And based on what we have seen coming out of this trip, that is certainly one of the deliverables and achievements. From the US perspective, I think President Trump has been desperately searching for some victories diplomatically on the world stage, given the setback US has encountered in the case of Iran, and also the plummeting or the decreasing domestic popularity of President Trump ahead of the midterm election. So I think from the White House perspective, some good news coming out of US-China relations, hopefully including things like trade deals and Chinese purchase of American products, will give the Trump administration a boost domestically. I think that was also achieved from this trip.
And Professor Xiang, would you like to bring you in? So how do you see this new vision of building a constructive relationship of strategic stability? What does it mean exactly?
I think the constructive strategic stability is a very significant new concept. It's a depart from the old concept where U.S. always wanted is strategic stability per se, without doing anything. When U.S. talk about strategic stability, really talk about status quo, basically telling Chinese don't do anything, especially over Taiwan and so on. Now, Chinese propose constructive means you have to have some action to make that strategic stability work, which is to say it's an action-related new concept, no longer just the status quo. So in that sense, it is, in my view, and Trump agreed with this, by the way. So this is a major breakthrough.
I think that this is a kind of innovative way to recognize, on the one hand, you still have rivalry and competition, but on the other hand, you can do so within a managed framework. And I think this is something that the Chinese have been seeking, not to have these constant disruptions and turbulence in the relationship. They want things to calm down. And this is President Xi's way of basically using language in particular. Strategic stability is very, very important. And I don't think we should understate just how important this concept was. I don't think the U.S. was particularly prepared for this articulation. And I think that, as you know, when you have a kind of a principle established, the Chinese internally negotiated that and they developed it. And so by the time President Xi put that on the table, the Chinese were very clear about what they sought. I think the Americans probably were trying to figure out what that actually meant. And I don't think they really came to a conclusion other than what Professor Sun said, that they're going to get a couple of trade deals under their belt and go home and raise the flag and say, you know, we've been successful here.
And I think the agreement now is they want to achieve stability and they want to have some deal signed. And Dr. Sun, I'd like to go to you again. So even if trade tensions ease, strategic rivalry between China and the United States remains really real because the United States still has two Section 301 investigations in China at this point. So just how much can economics really stabilize the broader relationship?
Well, that is a very big question. And I think for the strategic community here, well, in the United States, there's certainly the perception that although the Trump administration has not even made a reference to strategic competition or great power competition since the inauguration of President Trump last year, the theme of that great power competition is still very much prevalent in the U.S.-China relations. So therefore, all the measures that the Trump administration has taken to stabilize the relationship, to seek a trade deal with China, I think they have to deal with a significant domestic pushback or domestic resistance to that narrative. So from this trip, we all know that there were 5 Bs in the air that Trump administration was supposed to discuss with China. Those are beef, soybeans, then Boeing airplanes, the Board of Investment, and the Board of Trade. Those were the 5 Bs, right? I think all of those have significant implications for the U.S. domestic market and also the U.S. domestic narrative, as well as the discourse of debate coming to the China policy. Again, I want to also emphasize that in the reference to the constructive relationship of strategic stability, the Chinese president also put a time frame to it for the next 3 years and hopefully beyond. So I think that's also a recognition that the current China policy of the Trump administration is very distinct from the China policies of the Republican establishment and also the Democratic Party. So how sustainable this policy will be, whether it will still be in place beyond the Trump administration, I think that's still a big question mark.
Well, Professor Xiang, President Xi told President Trump that China's door will remain open and will be open wider. So what exactly is China prepared to do to open up this market to American companies? We see so many executives in Beijing this time.
Well, I think Chinese is actually more willing to open its doors now than the US side. So in this case, I'm sure what Xi wants to say is, it has to be reciprocal. If you now decide to allow China to enter US market, not just the goods, but also investment. Now, this is something I see might have a chance to have a breakthrough. For example, EVs. Trump actually not totally against the idea Chinese EV industry to invest in the United States. Now, that will be quite significant if they finally agree to do so. So yes, China is willing to open. China don't want American company to leave, but they need, reciprocal treatment there. So this is obvious.
Denis, one striking feature of this visit was the presence of America's top tech executives, including NVIDIA's Jensen Huang, that it suggested that Washington is beginning to rethink its technology restrictions on China.
That's interesting because we did see a concrete deal come to the surface. Some people thought that we were going to get explicit guarantees on rare earths and related minerals in return for a relaxation on semiconductors and related technologies. We didn't seem to get that in particular. There was a lot of discussion about different aspects of technology, and to be very honest, technology was all over the meetings. There was some discussions about AI, there were discussions about fentanyl and precursors, there were discussions about technology transfer, and there were even discussions, about high tech. But what we didn't get out of the relationship was that the U.S. are going to take these 3 steps, the Chinese government are going to take these 3 steps. I think the main thing two main things that they agreed to in the tech space were, number one, that the rare earth delivery export to the United States would continue till at least to the end of the year, and if everything to go well, it'll continue forward. And second of all, that they will try to find some mechanism to deepen their conversations about AI and AI governance in particular. And what that means specifically is it doesn't mean the U.S. and China are going to jointly develop, AI. What it means is that they're going to try to put in place a mechanism to manage the application of AI so that it doesn't move in directions that might create some nefarious uses that could, in fact, have rather catastrophic results.
Global markets and investors are really monitoring this visit closely and to see if they can manage their differences and rivalry more predictably. So from a geopolitical perspective, do you think this visit has reduced concerns about future instability in their relations?
I think this trip has certainly sent a message of stabilization of the U.S.-China relations. It does send a message of reassurance to the market that what we have seen, for example, last year, those dramatic and intense turbulence in the bilateral relationship is probably not going to become a common or a very regular event in the U.S.-China relations for the rest of the President Trump's term. But I think the market has also been observing very closely what specific deals have been reached during this trip. And on that, I think the market is finding a very difficult time to identify those specific deliverables, what specifically US and China have agreed upon. So I would say from a geopolitical point of view, this trip has been stabilizing, sending the positive message and the reassuring message. But coming to the specific deals between the two countries, the market is still waiting for more details.
Yeah, exactly. And currently we hear more from the US side and nothing has been confirmed from Beijing yet. Professor Xiang, Chinese President Xi says that 2026 will be a landmark year for China-US relations. How so? And what exactly should we be looking out for?
Well, look, we are dealing with a president who is exceptional. Basically, I think the Chinese are dealing with three Donald Trumps. Trump the revolutionary, Trump the bully, and the Trump the deal maker. Now, but it is unique for President Trump, who is the first president, if in my lifetime, my memory, who does not give a damn to ideological rivalry between great powers. Now, that is something totally unprecedented. In that sense, I think this summit, as we can see, it's very clearly indicated to China or to the world that this is China-US relations now becoming a normal, I put this way, normal great power competition, rather than what Biden administration tried to portray as a democracy versus autocracy, which, of course, as we can see, Biden-China policy is a total disaster. And there's a chance, or Trump will provide opportunity for the first time, in my view, for two major powers to negotiate, to actually making real deals, including geostrategic deals, such as Taiwan and the other issues. So this is 2026. It is extremely, extremely important in that sense. It's a new beginning. Yes.
And Denis, do you agree? Do you think it's a new beginning? And after this visit, do you think that both sides are becoming just more realistic about where cooperation is still possible?
I think that basically, to use the Chinese phrase, walking on two legs, I think that they recognize that rivalry is a permanent part of the relationship. It's not going away. And the thing that they've wanted to arrest is this kind of spiraling out of control possibilities. So I think that both gentlemen sort of got what they want out of this. Trump engages in what we can call transactional diplomacy. He got some deals, and he used a lot of personalized language when addressing President Xi. He's a great leader. They have a great relationship. The only thing he didn't get was that big hug that he told everyone he would get from President Xi, but he did get a very warm handshake. On the other hand, I think that President Xi, right out of the gate, was trying to establish some cardinal principle that will guide the relationship. So even in times of turbulence, it would be managed competition or managed rivalry. And I think that he was able to achieve that. But you could see very different styles on the diplomatic, front. And I think that if both sides walked away feeling happy, it's that they went in with very different expectations.
Thank you so much for your insight, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Coming up on the future agenda, global transformation. Is a new economic order taking hold? And what does it mean for the future of a multipolar world? And for now, from me, Jianhua, and the whole Agenda team in London here, that's goodbye.